Happy New Year! Is your YouTube feed starting to look like every single person you follow is doing a temperature blanket? I have gotten totally caught up with this in the past. I kind of knew like deep down inside that this might not be a good project for me, but I totally ended up with FOMO, fear of missing out, and saw all of like my other like yarn tube friends doing temperature blankets and it being excited about it, seeing the yarn they were getting. Some of my favorite creators that I don't know, some of them were doing it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do this so bad. This is your friendly reminder from me to you. You don't have to make one, and you're not really missing out on anything if it's not the right project for you. So how do you know if it's the right project? Well, do you like super tedious projects? It does involve a little bit more work than just picking up a pattern, because you do need to first off decide if your pattern is going to be the low of the day, the high of the day, or the high and the low of that day. And you need to then go to a website every day and write down the temperatures. And you're like, yeah, that's not that big of a deal. And it's not, but it's one of those things that just kind of all add on itself and kind of pile up. So you definitely need patience for this project, because you're going to be working on it for 365 days. This has got to be something that you are fine with taking an entire year on one project, meaning that you will always have a large project going on for the whole year or longer. Like most people who do a temperature blanket aren't actually getting like that row done every day. Like they're oftentimes going multiple days in between, having to catch up, and ultimately getting behind and having it take longer than a year. So for starters, you have to be okay having a really time-intensive project going on, and possibly then even adjust what else you're scheduling during that year. Scheduling to crochet or knit. You know what I mean? It will make an impact on the other projects that you are actually able to complete. Another thing, and I know like for some people, this might sound utterly ridiculous, but then for other people, you might be like, oh, I'm the second one. So if you are a person who likes symmetry, who likes things to be symmetrical, to like to have like a distinguishable pattern, you're probably not going to like the look of a temperature blanket. Obviously, you know, it's going to go from, depending on where you're at. Like I know I have a couple crochet friends in Australia, and for them it's super hot right now. So, you know, their January is summertime. So it's going to start out hot, you know, get cooler and go back to hot. Where here in North America, it is cold, gets hot, goes back to cold again. So there's some continuity, but also not. Like it's not nice, neat, orderly bands of color and all that. Like it's not going to be symmetrical. So you have to be okay with that. And then the last thing that I found, and was a pretty big obstacle for me when I attempted it, and I will fill you in on that a little bit later on. And you notice I didn't say I'll show you my temperature blanket. I said I'll fill you in on my attempt. But anyway, the biggest thing I ran into is you need a lot of yarn for it. And the one I was doing, I was double stranding, and I was doing the high of the day and the low of the day. I was using Afghan yarn, so it was like a fine 2-weight yarn. So it wasn't like there was like a bunch of thickness to it, but it's still, I had like 2 strands coming, and then, you know, sometimes the days varied just a little bit. So I believe I did mine in like 9 or 10 degree differences. So I had to have several, even though it was winter and super cold. I live in Iowa, and it does fluctuate quite a bit day to day. And then there were some days also where it was both of it the same color. So I had to have like 2 of the same color. You know, it was just kind of messy. It was messy. Like there was a lot of yarn strung out all over the place. And my kitten is 2 now, but he was itty bitty at the time. He was attacking the string like crazy. So I had to keep everything up here in my yarn room, which is the coldest room in my house. So anyway, I had to keep all of that supplies up here in this cold room. And even with the space heater going, like my hand was just freezing. So it was one of those where it then created a big obstacle because I had to come up to an unpleasant space and work and be cold. If you don't have a space that is really like dedicated and a nice place to go to, and that you can leave your yarn or your multiple yarns laying around, you know, for a year, that could also be a reason why you might not want to do a temperature blanket. Now, the reason why I say it's so easy to be tempted is because there are like a million different cool ones. I even have like when I was attempting to do mine, I had started a Pinterest board and I was just like, you know, like pinning all these different temperature blankets. Mine, I will leave a playlist for you. I think there's only like 3 or 4 videos on it that was temperature blanket related. If you want to go back in time, my editing was maybe a little questionable at the time, so don't hold it against me, but my attempt was to do granny squares for the month, which I still love the idea of. I do. And like I said, I was holding 2 strands together, and I was starting out obviously in the middle, as you do with a granny square, and then going out as to the end of the month. And then my plan was to, since, you know, months have different amounts of days, I also had one color set aside so I could go, like, I want to say, since some days have 31 days, I think I was going to make them 32 rounds, and then do like one border color on the 31 month. You know, I had the 1 row of border, and then if it was a 30, it would have like 2 rounds of the border, so all my squares would be the same. But it got way bigger. Like, my square was way bigger than I thought. Like, it turns out that 30 plus rounds in a granny square, even with 2-way yarn, turns out to be fairly big. So it got absolutely gigantic. So the granny squares are definitely one option. I remember when I was doing mine, I had seen another YouTuber do granny squares where she did the high and low for the day, and she actually only did hers for a month, and I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. So she did the kind of granny square where it's a circle in the middle and then you turn it into a square. So she had like the high and the low. I don't remember which was which, but like either the circle was the high or the circle was the low, and then the square portion to turn it into square was the other. So that's pretty cool. I think we're probably the most familiar to seeing like the different rows going back and forth. But I think probably my favorite style is actually where it's the little teeny tiny granny squares that are, you know, maybe only a few inches, like 3 inches or 4 inches, probably like 3 inches. And it's like just one for the day, you know, and so then it goes across and then you can really see for the whole year. I don't know. I don't have what it takes to sew all those granny squares together. I already know that. I mean, the mere idea of sewing, you know, it would end up being probably more than 365, because you got to have it, you know, even. So I don't know how many you'd have to have, but yeah. I know I don't have the follow through and the stick-to-itiveness to actually complete that project. But I think that that's one of my favorite to look at. So as I said, I tried and I failed. And just so you know, this is definitely not a sour grapes type of video. Like, I am not complaining about temperature blankets. I think they're super cool. But I just want you to know that it isn't a project for everyone. There are certain qualities that we may or may not have, and some of these personality traits make it either harder or easier to complete such a project. So I would definitely do a little bit of self-reflection before starting the project and see if realistically you know, you think you have what it takes to do that magnitude of a project. Like I said, I did not. I believe I got 2 full months done, and then I had started on my 3rd month. So I made it all the way into like a week or 2 of March, and I began dreading it. I mean, I was kind of dreading it the first 2 months anyway, while I was doing it, and so I would have larger portions of time that I wasn't working on it, so then it would become become more intimidating for me to come back to it. Now, the way I did it with the granny squares is, like I said, I went and I was building out, and it would make a pretty big blanket, but I liked the idea of the fact of, if you are starting this project later on in the month of January and you're wanting to really catch up, you know, it is a great way to make a ton of progress on those first days in the beginning when you're starting out, and you know, it's literally like only 4 clusters in that first day. So you can make up for a vast amount of time, but then once you get to about mid-month or so, it starts taking a lot longer and it feels a lot more daunting. So combining that with like the coldness of this room, and if you have been following along lately, you will know that this room has been freezing, and I've been all like jittery and bouncing around in my chair, even with a blanket on, because I have been so cold. I did come up with a solution. I have one of those heaters where I believe it has like the oil in it, and it looks like a little radiator, but it plugs in, so it does warm up the room, and it's like a nice gentle heat, but there's not blowing any air, so I can actually have it on while filming, and I am super excited about that. Like, it has made this just, yeah, like, you don't know how much better this has made it. It's made tremendously more pleasant, but I do still have a blanket on my lap anyway. So getting back to the subject at hand, it was unpleasant in the room. It felt very daunting. It was a mess. And the fact that it did bother me that it wasn't like nice and neat going out. Like the amounts of the colors were dispersed in odd manners, and just for my eyes and my preferences, like, I'm not a scrappy person. Even when I made a scrappy hat one time, I had to like plan out, like, it wasn't scraps. I specifically found yarns in my stash that like went together in a color scheme, but they were all like vastly different yarns. And then I like specifically was doing it and switching which yarn I was using, so it was not random at all. I can't do random. So that was really bothering me. The plus side of it was that I liked, by pairing the 2 yarns together, I felt like it did flow a little more, because, you know, you sometimes had the carryover of like the lows of the day being the same for a few days in a row. So I did kind of like that aspect, and I felt like because I had the 2 yarns together and they were finer weight yarn, I felt like it just was like softer on the eyes. You know, it wasn't like sharp rows you know, like psh, 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 psh. I don't know how to say that, like well-defined color rows. I did like how it just seemed like softer. If, like I said, if you want to check out those videos, I will have that playlist linked. But all in all, it just was not something that I enjoyed at all. And then I felt like it made me kind of grouchy, and I didn't have like that excitement about working on a project, where when I'm doing something that I'm really enjoying and then I'm like, oh, I want to do something else cool now. I was like, oh, I need to get through this. So I did have to, I put it off and I put it off and I put it off, and like, I knew I wasn't coming back to it. I really did. I knew I wasn't coming back. And so then like from March to September, and then in September I like put out a video and I'm like, there's no temperature blanket, you know, and it was just like, I was a little bit embarrassed because I had made, like I said, like 2 or 3 videos prior, and I was so proud of my choice in yarn and the pattern I made up and all that stuff. So anyway, that's how it all went down. It's not a project for me. One of the biggest issues that I do see when looking at other people's like journey with the temperature blanket, and this is probably, I feel like, the most common. So if you have had this happen, definitely like put it down in the comments. I mean, it's nothing to be embarrassed about or anything like that, but I know it's like a frustrating type of thing. So you know, a lot of us don't have like tons and tons of experience writing patterns, right? Like me personally, I'm not just sitting around making tons and tons of blankets. I know people who make blankets exclusively, but I don't. And so if I were to do it differently and like do the type of temperature blanket with rows, I really wouldn't have any idea how long to make my rows. And what I think the biggest issue is, if you are wanting to do it, is that people are underestimating the width they need to accommodate for the sheer length of the blanket. So what I have seen oftentimes is blankets that are basically very, very long and quite narrow. And then it's like, how do you use this for a purpose? Like, do you turn it sideways and everyone in the family sits on the couch and kind of snuggles under it? Maybe. I don't know. I think it's almost something where if you're like, yes, I love this, I want to do this, I love making blankets, I'm committing to this, I feel like you kind of almost need to do it like bed width. Like queen size bed width, in order to really have it match up and be like the right shape for the length that you're going to create with 365 days in a year. That's also a good time to mention that it's something where, you should be mindful too with your stitches. Like, something like a double crochet, it definitely goes a little bit faster, but it's a much longer stitch. So that's going to add length also to the amount of rows that the blanket is. So, is it something where it's like a single crochet, or what is it, like the moss stitch when you go, down into the other one? Something like that, where it's actually even shorter than a single crochet, right? I think somebody will know the answer to that. They can put that down there for me, but I'm pretty sure I'm using the right stitch name. But something like that, where you don't want to be contributing to accidentally making this thing, 10 feet long, and then, only like 3.5 feet wide. And I am not teasing you if you have accidentally done that. 100% I am not. I am being sympathetic and totally understanding, and then being, I just understand, like, what do you do? So I would definitely, if you want to do that, really look into making it wider than you think it should be. Probably. So if you still feel like a little bit of curiosity or temptation, I do have a couple options that I would like to throw out, so that maybe you can get like a taste of it, or like a little bit of fix, and see if it's something that you really want to do. So the first thing I would suggest is doing a smaller scale project. You could do a pillow. You could definitely do like a January pillow, because that would be much smaller, and you could really find out like if it's something you like. And if you do, you could make a February pillow, or however you want to do that. And then if you want to do the whole year, you would know, and you could be able to go back. You would have your records about what the temperatures were for the days, so you could easily keep doing the year. And then you'd have like a cool set as well, right? Another option would be like a smaller, like a throw size, like a lapgan or a baby blanket, where maybe instead of doing days, you are doing like weeks. Like there might only be like 52 rows in it, something like that. It would still take you the whole year to finish it, but it would be so much less work if you were doing it by weeks instead of days. Or what about, like I said, those of us here in North America, it is probably pretty cold. What about like a temperature scarf for the month of December or January or February? Something like that. You could have 31 rows in your scarf. If you use like a smaller, when I say 31 rows, I'm talking about like this way, not this way. You could use a fine yarn so it wouldn't end up being super duper thick. Something like that would be a fun idea, and kind of like commemorative. Like you could wear it every January or every February or every December or whatever. So that could be a fun idea, and again, give you the ability to find out if you like that type of project or not. And I do have a few other little tips where this might come in handy. Now, I know a lot of people that I have talked to have struggled a little bit, like I said, with getting behind on the temperature blanket, and it might take them a couple years to do 1 year. But the issue is it's just a random year that you found out about temperature blankets and wanted to crochet or knit one. I kind of like the idea of not necessarily being like, oh, I'm doing it for this year, but you could end up picking like any important year. It could be the year someone was born or got married or was adopted, or I don't know, just anything. You could have any, a graduation, any type of year like that you could definitely do. And for me, I'm still not going to do one, but for me, I feel like it would give me more desire and have more meaning because I know it's more special and it's like symbolic of something. So to me, I feel like I would be able to maybe power through a little bit more. And the fact that I'm even saying power through tells you I should not be attempting one of these ever again. But the point of that rambling was that, yes, I think that if it was the significance of something special, it would make it easier to complete the project. Okay. This next one I think is super duper important. I'm a very color oriented person. Like I have strong feelings about what colors I love and don't love. For me personally, I am not into like the typical rainbow Roy G. Biv type of temperature blankets. That would not go with a single thing in my house. Like when I did mine, in one of the videos I have, I went through and picked out like all my color schemes. It was, it almost ended up having like a Southwestern kind of vibe, which I was not mad at. But it was like, cream and then some golds and some turquoise and some orange. And then I didn't get to it, but it went into like an old rose and like a dark brownish cherry and like brown and tan. I put a lot of thought into the colors that went into it because I wanted it to go with my house. I wanted to be able to use it in my house and I wanted to enjoy the colors while I was working on it. So I would 100%, even if you're following someone else's pattern or whatever, I would still customize the color choices so that it does go with what you like. And since you use so much yarn for a project like this, you are probably going to be using a value type of yarn just because of the amount you would have to spend on the project. And so a lot of times value yarns do have tons and tons of options in it. Obviously Super Saver has a ton. Big Twist of Value has a bunch, not as much, but there is a bunch. They have a lot of colors I like. I don't know if it would be something you like or not. I did mine out of Herrschners afghan yarn. Again, it's a 2-weight, so be mindful of that. But I can't even remember how many colors they have in afghan yarn. I think it might be like 8. I'm saying 80. I have no idea. It could be 40. I don't know. But there's a ton. I will link because it's what I used and I actually like the yarn. It used to be made differently. It was scratchy. It wasn't super great, but the more like recent reinvention of it, it is softer. It is very pleasant to work with. And they are like smaller skeins, but it's like $2 a skein. It's not an affiliate link or anything, but I absolutely love Herrschners afghan yarn. So I will put a link to the page down in the description box if you are feeling crazy and want to try a temperature blanket. That is a good yarn as well. And then I know my friend Kristen over at Kristen Crochets, she did hers with I Love This Yarn from Hobby Lobby, but she actually picked out a bunch of variegated yarns. So hers is very unique. It's very pretty. To me, it almost looks like a scrappy blanket. I think it's really pretty, and that was a great option because that yarn it's a nice yarn for a value yarn. It's like, I feel like it's kind of like plush and squishy, and there's like an entire row full of that yarn, like one whole aisle at the store is I Love This Yarn, the acrylic stuff. So that's another great option as well. I keep talking about that playlist and it's probably getting annoying that I'm saying that, but I'm pretty sure I put in that playlist actually a live stream that Kristen and I did where I was like talking and asking her about her temperature blanket. So check that out. If you don't know Kristen, that would be a great video to get introduced to her. And I don't know if anybody anybody has ever done this or not. It was just like when I was coming up with my notes and I was like really thinking about like, could I do this different in a way that I would like it? Spoiler alert, the answer is no. But, you know, is there a way that I could do this and have it work for me? And I think that one of the things I think would be super interesting, and let me know if you've ever seen this, but what about a temperature blanket that is all one color, but like you do different stitches for the different temperatures? I mean, that might work better for someone who lives a little bit closer to the equator than I do and doesn't have as many highs and lows and doesn't have as many like variations. Like in the winter, it can get like -20 here. And then in the summer, you know, we can hit 100 or 102. So I had a lot of different colors. I want to say I had like 10 or 12, I think, or whatever that I had picked. So it might, that idea might work better if you have a smaller range, like say you live in Florida or something and you know your winters are much more mild, so you have a smaller range. But I'm like, that idea is kind of intriguing to me because I love the cohesiveness of just one color or like a tonal yarn or something like that, but having the different textures. Like, you know, obviously it would have to, you know, you want to make sure that your stitches all would go together and it wouldn't be like this going up or anything like that. But I do love texture, like monochromatic texture. I love that. Just me personally, not everyone does. Like, I can be a bit beige and not everyone likes that. But if you are kind of leaning that way, if you're like that whole minimalist millennial and you do love the beiges, you know, that might be something cool as well. Obviously, it would not be as easily identifiable, but I don't know. I think there's something to workshop there. So I'm going to quit talking about something I made up and get into something real again, which is the final thing that I want to say, because I think that, especially in the new year, it is just like human nature to be, you know, new year, new me. I'm like that too. I've got all sorts of goals right now. I like wanted to come out in this year and just like, just knock it out of the park and have so many ideas. And then I'm already kind of like losing steam on a little bit of stuff. So being realistic, not pessimistic, but realistic, I want to suggest that if you are attempting to do a temperature blanket for the first time, and even if you're like, I'm gonna love this, this is gonna be amazing, because I thought that too before I started. And then what I did was I bought all my yarn. I bought all of it. So, like I said, the Herrschners Afghan yarn is like $2 a ball. And I don't know, I spent like $70 right off the bat. I think it ended up being, I bought like 35 balls of yarn, you know, to start out with. And because I do love that yarn, I have been able to use it in a ton of other projects, and it was all colors I love because I made up my own color scheme. So, you know, it wasn't a waste, but I did not need $70 worth of Afghan yarn, you know, just in my stash. So what I really want you to do, even if you are 100% sure that you want to do this project, is maybe just buy a month worth of yarn to start out with. Maybe 2 months if you live in a place like me where it's going to be pretty cold, or like, I don't mean cold, but like consistent. Like if you're going to use the same colors probably the first couple months or whatever, you know, just buy a month or two worth of yarn and suck it up if it comes to like the shipping costs or stuff like that. Because I know in my mind that was the thing. I was like, oh, well, I can get this shipping deal right now. I'll just buy all of it. If I have to come back, then I'll have to spend more on shipping. You know what? Just suck it up and pay the shipping later on if you need to, because there is a chance, like me, that it could end up saving you money by not purchasing it all. So the cost of having all that extra yarn would be more than the amount you spent on shipping. So really consider that. Even if you are so certain you'll love your project, consider starting off with just that month or two worth of yarn. You can decide what your whole color scheme is for sure. I would definitely do that. I would have that all laid out so you know exactly what colors you want. Write it all down so you don't forget. Take pictures of it. Do whatever. But just don't actually spend the money and bring it home until you get a couple months into your project and know that yes, you do in fact enjoy it and want to continue it. And I do want to tell you, if you are a person who absolutely has done these projects and enjoyed it and loved it, I admire you. I 100% admire you for being just having like the skill to be able to complete a project of that magnitude. I admire that. I think it is admirable. I think it is wonderful. I am proud of you for doing it and sticking to it and enjoying it, especially if you're starting a new one. That is so awesome. I will let you go for now, but I will have a video up here for you that if you want to continue watching, you can. And I will also put a playlist somewhere around here as well if you want to check out all the temperature blanket goodness. Thank you so much for talking yarn with me. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.